Right. So I'll be talking about William Hockley, who is today sort of remembered as someone who is a major East India Company novelist. But at his time, he was sort of a very lowly official within the company and has largely been forgotten outside of his work of fiction. So, what today's paper does is to try and sort of juxtapose his official life and his sort of works of fiction. So, to just get straight into it, um, this is the company's headquarters at Leadenhall Street. So this is where the offices of Lloyds Bank today stand in the same sort of premises, different building. But just a brief chronology of the English East India Company for those of you who may not already know this. But what I'll be looking at today is largely the second and the third headings. So I'm sort of looking at the company in the early 19th century. So they established something called the East India Company College at Haileybury in Hertfordshire, and that building sort of still stands today. And Hockley is someone who is educated at this institution and then is sent to India. So, what I am looking at is largely sort of the period beginning from about 1810, which is where Hockley's career with the East India Company begins. Right. So to say a little bit more about the college, so this was sort of the building as it was originally constructed. You might perhaps see some sort of similarities with the National Gallery in London and Downing College in Cambridge. If anyone's been there, it's the same architect who designed it. So this was very much built as an institution which was mimicking some of the education that students then got at Cambridge architecturally as well as actually in terms of the formal pedagogy. So between the ages of 16 to 18 on an average, students spent 4 terms or 2 years here. And their curriculum was divided into European and Oriental. So within this, what they did learn was a whole range of things from political economy, which was all the rage at the time with Adam Smith and company. Um, they did do a little bit of law, but it was sort of couched in a Roman law kind of context, very much as something that they could apply when they went to India. They also did other things like philosophy, maths, drawing, which was quite significant because this is before photography. And they learned Persian, which was then the administrative language in many parts of India. In addition to that, they had some elements of Sanskrit, sort of ideas around Islamic and Hindu customs, um, and a whole smattering of other sort of miscellaneous Oriental subjects. So this is the building as it looks like today, and this is a dining hall, which perhaps is not drastically different from something that you might find at one of the Oxbridge colleges. Now, coming to Hockley himself, so this is from his enrollment file. So when you joined the company, you were expected to sort of provide a whole range of recommendations. So there's things from his schoolmaster at Bury St. Edmunds, which is near Cambridge, where he went to school to certify that he was sort of adept at mathematics and English, which were the two skills that you needed to join the company's civil service. So he joins the Bombay Presidency Civil Service for Western India. And by the time that he comes into the records, he's sort of risen in seniority. It's about 1818, and he joins as the collector's assistant in Ahmednagar in Western India. And he's in that capacity serving as a criminal and civil judge. So here he is deciding cases which are sort of capital cases, sometimes cases which deal with transportation of prisoners, and also fairly complex civil litigation, including inheritances, which are being litigated. And this is with very little sort of formal training in law. And that's not unusual for judges in the company at that period of time, in places that are outside the presidency towns of Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta, who would have then been English sort of solicitors or barristers, who would have then been allowed to practice there. But uncharacteristically, just 6 years from the time that he sort of comes into the archives, we also do see that he's dismissed from the company's civil service and from the company's employment as a whole, and very few traces of him remain outside of his published works. And his published works, I'm going to say a little bit more about them now, also remain incredibly sort of understudied. There's very few publications about them in sort of literature and almost nothing in terms of law. So his first and perhaps his best known book is this book called Pandurang Hari, or Memoirs of a Hindu. It's a very gripping sort of 3 volume book if anyone's interested. It's available open access, I think, on Google Books. Um, so he publishes this anonymously because he's lost his post in the East India Company. He's under a cloud. So he says that he receives this as a Maratha manuscript. He's referring to Marathi, which is the local language of that region, which I do also speak. And he says that he receives this from a man, and what he's done is that he's just translated it and presented it to an English audience. Now, this book traces the adventures of Pandurang, the sort of the character named, who travels through various parts of Western India in the early 19th century. And these are controlled by various sovereigns. It's not just the company. The company is sort of coming to become the chief sort of power in the region, but there are several others at the time who are in operation. Um, so Pandurang, in the course of his life, occupies multiple roles. So, from sort of the smallest bureaucratic office to eventually becoming a sort of a sovereign, he serves various roles as a judge, as a soldier, as a merchant, merchant's clerk. So he's done it all as far as roles that a native person at the time could do. Um, and during this, he meets several characters who tell him their life stories. And this is where it starts to get incredibly interesting because there are various encounters with sort of different legal systems. One character in particular is someone who is named Fazal Khan, and his character is sort of the hypothetical bad man because he is in perpetual conflict with the law across various judicial systems, including the company's own. Now, Fazal Khan is the son of a kebab maker, his mother, and a sword sharpener in the town of Bharuch of Gujarat today. And this is relevant for some of his narrative. So he spends a lot of time sort of idling and gambling, gets into trouble because the first sword he's asked to sharpen, he actually gets into a fight using that. And immediately he gets sort of judicially punished. He gets several strokes of the cane. At this time, this sort of town is controlled by the Scindias, who are local rulers of the former Maratha Empire. Um, and later, he sort of shifts to selling kebabs. He sort of tries to uh, sell dog meat kebabs and gets into trouble for that. And he's eventually expelled from the city of Bharuch. He then moves along with his mother to Surat, which was then the British judicial capital of Bombay. Now, soon after he moves to Surat, he is implicated in a murder proceeding, and that's when he experiences British justice up close. So he calls company justice an alien and a tedious process, and although he's eventually acquitted, Fazal says that he suffered more when he was imprisoned as an innocent rather than when he was a guilty man in Bharuch, where he was sort of punished instantaneously. But here he sort of is languishing as an under trial for quite some time in a British prison. So after he's released, he works as a sort of a clerk to a Hindu trader who is a serial litigant, and he frequently sort of forges documents. And Fazal says you can forge documents as quickly as you can roast a kebab. He discovers that he's very good at perjury, and after sort of helping his employer win a lot of cases, he eventually turns on him. As punishment, the judge orders that the trader is paraded on a donkey back to front and is publicly flogged. Now, this is something I've independently sort of seen in the judicial records as being a punishment that the company espoused of ritual dishonor. Now, Fazal eventually sort of joins the company's army as a soldier. He deserts, becomes a mercenary, and that's where he meets Pandurang, who's the protagonist. And the narrative ends with Fazal sort of being punished for some other crime eventually, and is sort of in chains in an English judge's garden, and he's quite happy about it. He's sort of singing um, as sort of the plot zooms out. He later, once Pandurang becomes the sovereign of the region, gets a post in um, Pandurang's army, and then he sort of is a key witness in a prison riot, which is where the collector of Ahmednagar, Henry Pottinger, who is Hockley's boss, is actually involved. And this is where I sort of shift away from the novel to some extent to Hockley's own life. So what Pablo Mukherjee says, this is an instance of is what's called colonial ventriloquism, which is where Hockley is sort of transposing some of his own experiences into fiction. So Pandurang has several critiques of the company's judicial systems. He says that the great ends of justice were defeated by the means taken to dispense it. So he's talking at several times about individuals who uh, were perverted and corrupted, who were tasked with enormous authority. He also talks about sort of how there was several artful agents of the courthouse. There's someone in the novel named Luchaji, which in sort of translation actually means Mr. Sly. And he is on the lookout to sort of always take advantage of the latest precedent, the latest regulation that is being passed. Now, this is an interesting part where Hockley says, at length, a gentleman was appointed to the office who saw into the device of this class of men, and they eventually sort of got rid of him. And without naming himself, I think it's fairly safe to assume that this was Hockley himself, given Hockley's own encounter with the company's judicial system. And this happens in Ahmednagar, which is where Hockley also served. So to come to Hockley's own sort of exit from the company, this is the court of directors sort of record where they say that he's dismissed from our service. Um, Hockley is someone who is actually supposed to be very adept at various Indian languages, so he's in a way a model student of the Haileybury College. Um, there is a carpenter in Ahmednagar who seems to signal to litigants that he can get Hockley's favor for a price. Hockley is eventually suspended as allegations emerge, and then more and more sort of allegations emerge. Eventually, 54 charges are leveled against him, and an inquiry finds they select 5 charges and then sort of they are proved against him. He's tried in Bombay rather humiliatingly. He sort of asked to come on foot under military escort. They say if he's put on a horse, he might try to escape and then they might have to sort of shoot him. And he is then sort of eventually acquitted in a criminal trial, but he's not allowed to resume his position. He returns to London, and this is sort of much later in the 1860s that I've seen him write for financial aid from the Royal Literary Society. He says that I came back to London without the director's permission, and it was much to their surprise and annoyance um, that he presents his case for reinstatement, but he's eventually unsuccessful. And that's the last bit of writing of Hockley that I've seen. And other scholars seem to say that he died that very same year after serving some time in a French prison. I'm not exactly sure why. So just to sort of round up, I know I'm coming close to time.
Yep.
Is yep, is sort of just looking at what this means for us in terms of what do we do when we find this legal history in unexpected places. So it's sort of looking at both records as well as fiction. But what we understand from his life is the vagaries of company disciplinary and judicial processes, because these were often not like any others followed in the UK. Um, and from his fiction, we get insights into judicial systems, which may not always have sort of extensive records or follow very different logic. So it's important to look beyond just the doctrinal work. And there are many who, like Hockley, remain understudied and under-researched. And what we do need is sort of greater funding and a diversity of researchers. And I very much like the keynote's idea of the constellation of what we can do to better understand and contextualize what we unearth from these unexpected places.